Welcome one, welcome all to the greatest show of them all. It is the NFC East Mixtape, which you can listen to on any one of SB Nation's NFC East blog podcast networks. You can also watch this show on the Bleeding Green Nation YouTube channel or the Blog and the Boys YouTube channel. And if you do, you will see the visual stylings of myself. I'm RJ Ochoa from BTB. He is the enemy, Brandon Lee Gowton from BGN. BLG, happy Monday for us, Wednesday for the listener, pre-4th of July for us, post for them. Lots of time traveling happening this week on the mixtape.
The true enemy is the person who bought Twitter and ruined it, in my opinion.
Yeah, been a rough weekend for Twitter.com and Twitter's other like ancillary friends. I'm big in the Instagram game now. You know what I mean? Like that's if you have to pick one, like if you're a college recruit and you have to pick a non-Twitter place to go, what hat are you grabbing?
I mean, it's just not the same. Like it's an entirely different thing. I don't think it really makes up for it. Yeah, I mean, there's only Twitter to me. That's the only thing that exists.
Okay. Well, glad to know you're open for discussion. Would it be fair to characterize the state of Twitter in our present moment as a dumpster fire?
It really would. So it's really fitting that we're talking about this on today's episode, which I think is a highly anticipated episode that's featuring a highly anticipated guest talking about their highly anticipated series that they do each year.
That person, that there is the one and only, for the first time ever on the NFC East Mixtape, Jimmy Kempski from Philly Voice, the Philly Voice. What's y'all stance on the, Jimmy? Are you like an Ohio State situation?
I do not like when people say the Ohio State. It's annoying. So yes, I'm anti-the.
So you're just Philly Voice, PV.
Oh, so yes, it's just Philly Voice. Actually, I've done a couple dumpster fire radio hits over the last week with other, cities who don't know my website or whatever. Not my website, but my company's website. And they butcher the hell out of it. Like a lot of them were calling it like Philadelphia Voice. And yeah, I'm not going to correct them on the air, yeah, they all. It's not that hard. It's Philly Voice. I think actually our handle is the Philly Voice. So I don't know. Maybe some mixed signals on our part.
Maybe a good thing Twitter's dying then, because if that's your handle, you know what I mean? We'll get rid of the confusion. Wow. Well, as Brandon said, this is the first time you're here to talk about the dumpster fires. You've been on BGN Radio, which is where this show lives, partially at least. I don't know how you want to do this. Like you're the pro when it comes to discussing this. Should we go do you want to start with the Cowboys and pick should I defend one of your points?
Should we go bottom up? Should we go maybe let's go Cowboys first. I think Cowboys are always a good. I was going to maybe say Commanders first, but let's
go off the order of the show. RJ also not letting the guest dictate the show.
I actually think so. Jimmy, we normally discuss matters in divisional standing order. So so like this whole offseason, the Eagles have been front and center. Sure. But I do think, if you hear me out, Brandon, bit of a spin zone here. This is the Eagles first. Like this is the Eagles. Joy first. You know what I'm saying? Like we're catering to the Eagles fans first and foremost. If we, put the Eagles on the stand first, we piss them off right away. Is that not fair? Jimmy, there's a reason Jimmy did the Eagles last. Is there not, from Philly Voice, not Philadelphia Voice?
I do them last every year because the first couple years I did them, I think it was only the first year I didn't even do the Eagles. So because I cover them year round and I bash them enough as it is. So I just skipped them the first year, and then people were like, "Well, why aren't you you're not going to do this for the Eagles too?" And I thought, you know what, I probably should just do them too. So I started doing them. So they always wound up being last, and Cowboys always lead off because they got more fans than anyone else in the world. Yeah. So they're an obvious starting point for me as far as that series goes.
Wow. Okay. I will say, I think this is the first time you and I ever podcasted together, Jimmy. I remember hearing a long time ago, like in a tweet, somebody was like, some Cowboys fan was like, Jimmy Kempski sucks. And then somebody was like, he sucks. But when the Eagles suck, nobody trashes them harder than he does. So I respect him. So this is an appropriate series for that.
Brandon too, but Brandon goes pretty hard on them as well.
Well, I didn't know
I'm coming for that title.
Yeah, I didn't know Brandon.
We both hammer them when they're not good. And there are others too. We're not the only ones, but yeah, we're equal opportunity smashers of the Eagles. Yeah.
So did you hate Jalen Hurts last year too? Do you currently hate Darius Slay? Is that where this lines up?
I'm not as down on Slay as BLG is. And last year, I don't know that we were necessarily down on Jalen Hurts. It was more just kind of let's see which we were both on they should trade for Russell Wilson.
And so were they.
Track. So that's been sort of the tough one to live down, I guess. But yeah, we were more in sort of like, we're not down on them necessarily. We're just, let's see it.
Okay. 10 reasons why the Cowboys will be a dumpster fire. Number one is the Cowboys have become a loser organization. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I don't think anyone under the age of 40 is like protesting this. But do you want to explain? Because this was your leadoff, so I presume this is the one you're most passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily a reason so much that they are going to be bad specifically in 2023. I guess number 1 and number 10 kind of marry up with each other in that they just, I mean, well, first of all, I don't need to hammer this home any further to Cowboys fans than they've already heard it, but they haven't, the Cowboys haven't been to an NFC Championship game in over a quarter century. So there's that. And they've had a lot of opportunities. I think they've lost, I think 7 times in the divisional round, and then like an additional 5 or 6 or something like that in the wild card round. So they make it to the playoffs a lot, whereas the other teams that are sort of in that, I guess, a month or so ago, somebody who covers the Cowboys put out that they have, not been to the NFC Championship now in over 10,000 days, which is just a crazy stat. And there's only, 4 or 5 other teams that can say that. Commanders, Lions, Dolphins, I think we're in there, Browns. Those teams have not been to the playoffs anywhere near as much as the Cowboys have. And I think their roster construction, over the last 15, 20 years, it's kind of been very similar. Like you can, at any point during that timeline, you can look at that roster and you can say, man, they got some really good star players. Like, once upon a time there was DeMarcus Ware and there was Des Bryant. 10 years ago, you're talking about Tyron Smith at the height of his game. You could throw Amari Cooper in there. You could throw guys like now like Zach Martin. You can throw who else am I missing here? Defensively, it doesn't matter. Anytime you can pick out plenty of star players and they have that now. And guys like CeeDee Lamb is sort of a budding superstar. You have Zach Martin, who's one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. Dak Prescott has as at times in his career looked like a star player, but they just never build a full roster that can seemingly compete into with the best teams in the NFL anyway into January. And whether it's due to injury or just they have some positions that they've neglected or just the lack of depth, it seems to bite them in the ass every year in the playoffs. And I don't think it's like just a matter of LOL, they choked again. They did it's just a matter of like, oh, Tony Romo can't, just doesn't have it, can't, win in the playoffs. Dak Prescott can't win in the playoffs. It's just the lack of having a full, complete roster seems to bite them. Like I said, every year at the end of the year.
Brandon, your thoughts?
I mean, I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Do you think that's fair?
I think so. I used to the end of the 2019 season were the final days of Jason Garrett, even though the Cowboys, needlessly dragged that on a week before like not technically firing him. Like it was the dumbest process ever to let go of a head coach. But I used to tweet out and it would always pop off. Kind of what you ripped off there, Jimmy. I was like, these are the players that the Jason Garrett era wasted. And, it was like Tony Romo, Jason Witten, a name you didn't mention, Sean Lee, yep. And players who had like amazing seasons too. Like Rolando McClain had an amazing season for the Cowboys in 2015. Right. Not a great like Ring of Honor player, but like you still got that at one point. And so it just felt like you just put us all through this hell for a decade for no reason. I would add to your point about them being a loser organization. They have squandered the 1 seed twice in that time. And not just squandered, but if you're the 1 seed, you're in the divisional round right away. But did so in embarrassing fashion. Like
which that is sorry to cut you off. Which one was more painful to you? 2016 or the one where they lost to the Giants in the first game?
I think that's a matter of circumstance, and that Giants one, that 2007 divisional round.
Okay,
that was my senior year of high school, and so like I was a lot more like emotionally dramatic. Like I told I was like, I'm not going to school the next day. Like to my parents, I was like, you know what I mean? Like I was a little bit more mature later, and even then the 2016 one, you felt this like sense of youth. It was like Dak and Zeke have just arrived. Like this is just the beginning. So, you know, and, you know, in 2016, they lost to Aaron Rodgers, which is annoying as it was like, well, hey, like, you know, this is the dude. Whereas in 2007, it was Eli Manning. It was just stupid.
They probably swept them that year too. I'm guessing, right? In
they did. And then there was the whole, like, it's so hard to beat a team 3 times in 1 year thing, blah, 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 whatever, which the Cowboys did to the Eagles 2 years later, for what it's worth. But yeah, so I mean, they are a loser organization. It's amazing that they are still as popular as they are. But I mean, I'm grateful for that, obviously. But but I do think, and I think you would both agree, they are different from the other crops, or the other crop of teams in this unfortunate club that like haven't been there. Like, name 3 good Lions or Commanders or Browns or Dolphins teams that we've seen over the same stretch of time. You know, but that adds to the frustration, because you would assume that just like mathematical probability would suggest that you would get to one of these title games, like maybe lose it, but like, you know, the fact that you always manage to come up short here in this specific time frame. And unlike those teams too, they've had 2 viable franchise, whatever you want to call them, quarterbacks. Like, this whole era has basically had legitimate, sustainable quarterback play. Their last title was 95. Tony Romo entered the fold as a full-time starter in 2006. Like, we're talking about 17 years here of quarterback play that's good enough to help you kind of stumble into something at the very least.
One thing I actually discovered that I wasn't anticipating was when I was writing the Commanders one, this year is going to be their 7th consecutive year with a different week 1 starter. So I was curious how that compared to the rest of the NFL. And I found how many, you know, teams have, you know, how many quarterbacks each team has started during that span. And there's only one that is going to start the same guy this year plus the last 6 years, and of course that's the Dallas Cowboys.
He's the longest. I don't know, you know this. He's the longest tenured starting quarterback in the NFL.
Okay, well,
just with his specific team. That happened when Aaron Rodgers was traded. Brandon, your follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, again, we're not going to go through like all 10 reasons for each team. You can just read the articles on phillyvoice.com, but I think that was a good place to start. I wanted to kind of get, Jimmy, your strongest reason, because obviously I don't think you like necessarily believe in all 10 like equally. I'm sure there's one that really jump out to you, but so we covered that. But the other one that, and we've kind of broached the topic here, we're just talking about it, was Dak. And I thought a really interesting case against Dak at number 5, which isn't even really the title of this section of the article is, "Are we sure Dak Prescott is good?" And basically, I guess I want you to take us through your feelings on Dak. RJ is obviously probably, I think, one of the bigger Dak guys there are out there. So I guess I kind of want to see you debate this.
Yeah, I mean, he led the league in interceptions last year, despite missing 5 games. But for me, it's more than that. Like, he's not the same player he was 5-6 years ago when he was a running threat, and more specifically a running threat in the red zone. I mean, he scored a lot of touchdowns. He was the type of quarterback in a lot of ways similar to Jalen Hurts, and that he could power through tackles. He could break arm tackles, and you know, he was willing to sort of get yards after contact. That's over. Like, after he suffered that gruesome leg injury, he just doesn't run much anymore. He didn't run the year after, of course, which you would expect. But then even a couple years, removed from that injury, last year in 2022, averaged like 15 rushing yards per game, which puts him basically in the bottom half of NFL quarterbacks in that stat, which is, really surprising to see. It's not that he can't do it. He just doesn't do it. And I think because, if he's just not going to use that part of his game anymore, he becomes a lot easier to defend, and the Cowboys offense becomes a lot easier to defend in that he's not the dual threat that he once was when he was, extremely dangerous in years 2, 3. Well, first of all, his rookie year 2, I guess, but earlier in his career.
His first touchdown in the NFL was a rushing one, so I think that was the rap on him originally. But he was never Jalen Hurts.
Sure.
I mean, to be very clear here, the Jalen that we all kind of know is the end of the spectrum. But he was never that. He did have the occasional, get out of the pocket, move around, run around, whatever. He had a rushing touchdown for what it's worth in the wild card win in Tampa. And I remember tweeting then, Twitter's been a really popular subject. I can't imagine why. But I remember tweeting then, this is a lame sports thing, but it was man, this dude really wants it. It was such a desperate, touchdown, but in a good way. You know what I mean? You could really tell that whatever, disposition he has held, that hey man, we're gonna hold off whatever, was everything's out the window in the playoffs, which was really cool and exciting to see. So I mean, I agree, I guess, that he's not the runner that he once was. But again, I just like I don't miss that. It wasn't like, you know, it's not like I'm longing for days for him to run, but I think he might. I mean, if you and this, I want to come back to this in a moment. If you buy into Mike McCarthy's, we're going to run the ball thing. I would only push back on the Dak front. And there's a little bit of self-admission from you in the article on this that, and like I think there's been this cyclical nature with quarterback discussion where people are like, well, what does he do? Blah, blah. And then it's like, well, Jalen Hurts is on a stacked team. So it's like, it's okay to be a really good quarterback on a really stacked team. It's okay to have a front office who understands you're awesome and wants to help you out. And Dak was not in that position last year. And you know, hasn't been in a few years. And that's why I think there's a lot of Cowboys fans excited and hopeful that the Brandon Cooks acquisition, the fact that they were able to kind of maintain some prominent pieces on defense really helps. I mean, he has felt like somebody who's been fighting with one hand behind his back. I mean, he's the only, you know, franchise quarterback, so to speak, of the last handful of years whose team allowed him to play out the tag. That isn't Kirk Cousins. You know what I mean? That a team that isn't run by fools at the time. I mean, this is not a functional football operation that he plays in and for. And so he has to overcome that. That doesn't, you know, make him better than he is. But I mean, those are slights that he has to deal with that I think people on this side of the fence, you know, are more willing to acknowledge on a daily basis.
He's a top what quarterback in the league?
I always say top 6, 7, 8, and that line kind of floats like on a week-to-week basis, right? Like every week that finishes, Patrick Mahomes is probably like the best quarterback in the NFL, right? And then like in a given week, your top 5, like I think it's probably not as fluid, but your top 5 are what? Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Hurts, Herbert, if you are like, you know, if you're in that mood, but like maybe Herbert's the first guy out on a given week, and maybe one week, you know, I don't know, maybe that's the week Dak pops, maybe that's the week Bryce Young has an amazing game. You know what I mean? Like I think there's some like small movement back there between the 5th and 9th spots that kind of happens on a weekly basis, just based on performance and even like ranking. Like it affects how we feel about players. Like I killed Josh Allen after they lost to the Vikings. Like he wasn't a top 5 quarterback that week. You know what I mean? Like things like that. Like I do think that, I don't mean to move the goalpost, but I think that line kind of adjusts just slightly. Like Lamar Jackson, I would say, is a top 5 quarterback some weeks. Like you have that, you know, maybe Trevor Lawrence starts to flirt with that more often this season. I think it is loose and fluid. That's my take. Do you both agree that he's the second best quarterback in the NFC at worst?
I mean, that's
you
not...
had the. I don't know that, like, I'm not bragging about that, but I saw Jimmy, you scoffed at the notion that some people think he's the best, right? So like,
I mean, you can't say he's better than Jalen Hurts at this point. I mean, there's just no argument for that. But yeah, he's certainly number 2. And I don't think there's really anyone that close. Like, who would number 3 be? Geno?
Derek Carr, Geno, like
I would say Cousins. I don't hate him like most do. But, and maybe like some people would be like Matthew Stafford won a Super Bowl. Like you run into that kind of stuff.
But Stafford is I think is a reasonable enough
if he's healthy, sure.
He was not healthy last year.
My final thought on the Cowboys, and then we could move on. Is I don't have like I'm gonna lose sleep at night over this sort of take. But so number 2, I think it's important to use the headlines. Is Mike McCarthy is still the head coach with the Pinocchio emoji. And number 3 is kind of like a subset of that to me. They hired Brian Schottenheimer to be the OC, LOL, with the tilted laughing emoji. I do think, and Brandon knows this, when Mike McCarthy said we want to run the ball, whatever, like nobody has let that go. Like that was such a, if you read the tea leaves, if you look at the actions the team has actually taken, a week after he said that, they cut Zeke, they traded for Brandon Cooks. But like people want to like just clamp onto that and act like he said that he wants to be Army Navy. You know what I mean? And so I do think there's a little of like overanalyzing on that. And Brian Schottenheimer, like, do we all really care who it is that's Brian Schottenheimer? Like Mike McCarthy's the play call. Like that's the most important element to me. I think again, we're really over assessing the value, quote unquote, that Brian Schottenheimer brings to things. That's my point. I'm sort of a McCarthy defender, but it's only because I think that the McCarthy bagging is loose and mostly unsubstantiated. Maybe not from people like you two, but like there are people who hate him because of, you know, stupid, dumb things and narratives that Aaron Rodgers twisted in his direction.
So on the reading the tea leaves part, I mean, they needed a receiver. They had to get one because that was a major hole that they had last year. So
that they created for what it's worth.
Yeah, whether that was going to be Cooks or DeAndre Hopkins or fill in whatever receiver. They went out and they got one, which they had to do. So, I get the point being made that, they're going to throw the ball because they added a receiver. But for me, the tea leaves is they hired Brian Schottenheimer. Like, he's been an offensive coordinator in the NFL for what, like 10 years, 10 different seasons, something like that. And only one of those seasons was he in the top half of the NFL in passing attempts. And that was 13th. And that was like 2007 with the Jets one year. They were probably very bad. I'd have to go back and look, but they were probably very bad, and they had to throw because they were behind a lot. So he, and he basically said, which everyone ran with, of course, we want to run the ball. But also, I think the owners made pretty clear they want to run the ball. And I guess the tea leaves that work against that are, like you mentioned, they cut Zeke. All they have left is Tony Pollard, who has never really carried the load for a team at any point during his professional or college career. So they're heading into the season with him. Maybe they add someone between now and the beginning of the season, and I probably assume they will, because beyond him, there's just not much there. They, of course, drafted the little guy out of Kansas State. What else they have Rojo, I think, and Rico Dowdell's been there for like 13 years at this point.
Malik Davis. Yeah. I mean, but that's my point. Like, they're not, do I think they're going to throw the ball 40 times a game like Brian Schottenheimer Seahawks in 2020 at the beginning when Russ was cooking? No, but I don't think that, like, again, I think everybody ran with, I think Mike McCarthy is easy fodder for a lot of people. I think the line is a stupid one to say in today's day and age, but I also think, and you have to be willing to give McCarthy some credit here, which I know neither of you are. I think Mike McCarthy knows the people he works for and knows that they built their NFL kingdom, behind the NFL's all-time leading rusher. It's dumb, it's silly, it's outdated, it's whatever, but the Joneses want to be the team who runs the ball. So McCarthy knows what he has to say when he's in front of a microphone, and I think he's a humble enough guy to do that. I think he manages the dichotomy between being the head coach and having Jerry Jones and whoever be involved better than his predecessor, which people kind of gave Jason Garrett weird credit for. So I think he knows which itches to scratch and which ones he's allowed to have. The other thing is, like, within your assessment, I'll call it, of McCarthy, you talked about how he's not the analytics guru he hyped himself out to be. That's another thing. Like, the lie is something people have never let go of him, but he has been. But he has, I think, again, you're taking it super literally, though. Like, you're taking it to mean
literally
he watched, but you're taking it to mean he watched nothing. Like, he didn't say, like, oh, I watched absolutely nothing.
Why would you say it at all?
I mean, again, I don't want to debate something from 3 years ago, but my point is, they are a much more analytically driven team than they were. And again, my point isn't they're the most analytically heavy team in the NFL. They're the Eagles. They're 4th and 1-ing it all the time. But they do things that are unconventional. I don't know if either of you remember their crazy comeback against Atlanta in 2020.
With the weird onside kick that was just kind of
the watermelon kick. Yeah. So in that game, they were down 15 and scored a touchdown. Right. So that's the, like, you're down 9. Do you go for 2? Do you not go for 2? That was like his 3rd game as the team's head coach, and they went for 2 right away. People still will refuse to acknowledge. Nope. You always you keep making a 1-score game. Blah. Like, those are areas where there have been marked growth in my mind, in my estimation, as somebody who watches this team and covers this team every day. So I think you guys just, I think you have fun at McCarthy's expense. And that's okay. I have fun at Nick Sirianni's expense and his dumb highlighter on his visor. So
the one thing I want to touch on, though, before we move on from the Cowboys to someone else, is actually, I think the biggest concern for them heading into the season is that offensive line. I mean, in my mind, that thing is a ticking time bomb. And I'm sure, you've talked about this extensively, but Terrence Steele, he's got 3 torn ligaments in his knee. I saw like, someone tweet out, basically, I don't know if it was Stephen Jones or McCarthy or Jerry Jones said he's probably not going to be ready for a training camp. Yeah, no kidding. He's not going to be ready for week 1. He's got 3 torn ligaments in his knee from December. And then even when he is available at some point, I have to imagine that his, lateral movement skills are just not going to be there. I mean, not to what he was able to do previously. And he was already kind of more of like a masher in the run game than he was sort of a premier pass protector. So now if he's not there, who starts at right tackle? Is it now Tyron Smith moves over there, where, in my opinion, I thought he kind of struggled a little bit at the end of the year last year when he was playing over there. And then you have Tyler Smith playing left tackle. And then, obviously if you have Pedish at center, you have Martin at right guard. But left guard, man, the depth on this offensive line, not looking great. Who is it? Is it Chuma Edoga they signed in free agency? Is it Matt Farniok? Is it Josh Ball's probably a backup tackle more than he is a backup guard. Stunk when he had to fill in against the Texans last year. Farniok stunk in the beginning of the year last year. So it's probably Edoga, who's basically kind of been like a career backup to this point in his career. So you already have one guy that's going to miss some games in my mind. You have another guy in Tyron Smith who is eventually going to go down. We pretty much have to expect that at some point he's going to get hurt for however long the rest of his career is. And I just don't think they have the horses to fill in when they suffer some injuries along that line.
I think that's really fair. Brandon would agree. I trashed them for their approach to this last year, and Tyler Smith saved them when Tyron Smith, I wouldn't even say your point, the collective point, Tyron Smith predictably went down right before the season started.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Peters helped save them too. Like, they were really great at kind of managing things in spot duty and just kind of, and I think that's where Cowboys fans feel a lot of unease. For so long, it was really chalk, like who your offensive line is, like left to right. And so now it's like, this is how the other half lives. You're right. Like the line you listed out, like your projection for their starters is, I think, how most people agree it should be. There's a lot of people who want Tyler Smith to start at left tackle right away. And then it's a matter of like, well, what are you going to do with Tyron? Are you going to play him at right tackle? What about if Terrence Steele is healthy? Are you going to still do that? The Cowboys have thrown out the idea of playing Terrence Steele or Josh Ball left guard. That could just be gamesmanship or whatever, but they've talked about it at least publicly.
Terrence Steele playing guard makes sense because he's not going to have that lateral agility anymore.
Well, so maybe that, I mean, but then again, like, even if after you find the amalgamation you like, it's even if you're like, I want Tyler at left tackle, I want Tyron at right, and I'll put Terrence Steele left guard. We just talked about how Dak Prescott is the longest tenured quarterback in the NFL, starting quarterback. He has never had Tyron Smith for a full season, ever. The last time Tyron played a full season was 2015.
Yeah. So
what happens when that happens? Are you kicking Terrence back over to right tackle?
Yeah.
Are you playing Josh Ball at right tackle? Matt Willetsko was the fifth round pick they got for Amari Cooper last year. He didn't play it all last year, but there's a lot of hype. I mean, you know how it is this time of year.
Yeah.
So that's I agree. That's the largest level of that's the most objective unease that you can find with the roster. There's a lot of points where you can be really optimistic about what they've done. And I think you can find computations that you like here, but it's like, if we turned injuries off, then cool, like let's ride. But injuries are a factor that they're likely going to have to deal with, plus regression from injuries, which obviously, to your point, takes time. Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
All right, time to move on to another team. But real quick, before we do a little fact check, that 2007 Jets team that Jimmy mentioned when Shoddy was like 13th in passing attempts or whatever for the first, they were 4-12. So yeah, there's some game script going on there. Game script.
I do want to toss this out just for whatever context you think it is. Marty Schottenheimer gave Mike McCarthy his first job in the NFL. Like he's, so like, I mean, I'm not promoting nepotism by any stretch of the imagination.
Sounds like
but
you are.
But this is the way the NFL works. Like, I think we're all, you see that all the time, like when it comes to coaching. So he Brian Schottenheimer is a McCarthy guy. Like, I think that's his biggest qualification for this job, is he is somebody who's close to Mike McCarthy, who happens to be the play caller for the offense.
All right, who are we moving on to next? I think we should do the Eagles. I think we should do the Eagles because we usually do Cowboys, Eagles at the top, and then we do Commanders, Giants towards the end, because we actually don't care about those teams at all, and then we don't talk about them, and the listeners complain about that. Is that fair, RJ?
I do think that's fair. And again, like my logic of catering to Eagles fans first, now we should cater to Cowboys fans. This would be, I think, the one that Cowboys fans would enjoy the most. So like, and you're like do either of you know who Giants or Commanders fans hate the most right now? Like, who would you say?
The Giants fans definitely hate the Eagles more than any other team. No question about that. I don't know about the Commanders, but the Commanders probably don't like the Cowboys very much. That's a much longer rivalry, much more established rivalry over time. Giants fans freaking hate the Eagles. Have owned that team. They've won 25 of the last 31 in that matchup. The last time the Giants swept the Eagles was 2007, and the Eagles have swept them 8 times since. So like, it's been total domination. They beat them 3 times last year. So, and 2 of them were like, basically over by the second quarter. So yeah, that's a team that, I mean, they hate Nick Sirianni. There's just a lot going on there with Eagles Giants.
2007 getting a lot of shout out here with the Giants sweeping the Eagles and Brian Schottenheimer's Jets. Okay,
Yeah.
so number one, just to kind of start things off.
And the Cowboys 1 seed loss against the Giants was,
and that was
the
2007.
and so that was the sweeping of the Giants that they failed to do the 3-1 year. So again, great times. Anyway, they lost a bunch of starters. I think that was always going to be the criticism of the Eagles. So it is what it is. 1 and 2, I think, kind of marry together. You can tell me if you disagree. A lot of their best players are getting pretty old.
Yeah.
Fletcher Cox is your kind of bright shining example in this sense. Your point.
Yeah, on the losing a lot of players, I thought they lost fewer players than I was expecting. I thought they were going to lose James Bradbury, for example. But the guys they did lose, they lost both their starting linebackers. They lost both their starting safeties. I think Javon Hargrave is one of the most underrated players in the league. Like, awesome play. You look at he had 11 sacks last year, and if you look at him, if you cut him up, you watch him, there's maybe like one where it's the variety of the quarterback just kind of, landed in his lap and it was an easy sack, which, a lot of defensive tackle sacks come that way. No, this guy was like wrecking interior offensive linemen, and he can win with speed. He can win with power. Him not only leaving, but also going to another NFC contender. I thought that really hurt with him, going to the San Francisco 49ers. But anyway, that's a big loss. The linebackers pre-2022, when you're starting guys like Nate Gary, season killers. So like last year, they finally got some, quality linebacker play from TJ Edwards and from Kaiser White. Those guys are gone. Now you're putting a lot of eggs in the Nakobe Dean basket. Played like 20-something snaps last year in the regular defense. So, unproven player. And then the other spot is probably going to be a training camp battle between Nicholas Morrow and Christian Ellis, who, only Eagles fans listening to this we don't know who he is. So it's two guys that are, you wouldn't feel super comfortable if you have to start one of those two guys. So the safety position, I don't think it's quite as bad, but you lose CJ Gardner-Johnson, who led the NFL with 6 interceptions last year, despite missing 5 games. It's a loss of production there. So you lose him, you lose Marcus Epps, who is just kind of a serviceable type starter, and now you're bringing in Terrell Edmonds, who's an experienced veteran safety. You got Reed Blankenship, who played well enough when he had opportunities last year, and a rookie in Sidney Brown. So not only do you have a lot of guys that are probably more than likely going to be not as productive as the guys that are outgoing. Like they drafted Jalen Carter. Milton Williams is sort of waiting in the wings for a bigger role. I fully expect both of those guys to be productive in some way, but are they going to, are those guys' snaps going to be as productive as the snaps that Javon Hargrave gave you last year? And the answer is probably no. So I think as a roster overall, they got a little bit worse. And then on the other side of the ball, you lose Isaac Seumalo. Again, really underrated player. Now you got a training camp competition between a center in Cam Jurgens and a tackle in Tyler Steen for a spot at guard. So yeah, I mean, there's some question marks on whether or not they have, upgraded the roster. I don't think they have. I mean, in my opinion, it was the best roster in the NFL a season ago. So it's going to be hard to improve on that. But, I think just on paper, it's probably not as good of a roster as it was a year
ago. Jimmy, I'm curious what, you feel the strongest about. I mean, obviously the natural regression stuff, I think, is just very obvious. It's not like, oh, you have to really think about that long and hard. I do agree that losing Hargrave was overrated. And that's why getting Jalen Carter was such a big deal, because you kind of needed someone to, obviously that's not a 1-for-1, but at least have some upside to be better in there. You can't just rely on Jordan Davis getting better from year 1 to year 2. I guess one of the more interesting points that I thought on your list was that number 5, they still haven't beaten any good quarterbacks.
Yeah.
This is a pretty crazy list when you look at the last 25 quarterbacks, basically. And this includes some combos in here for games where the starter got knocked out. Certainly, most notably, Brock Purdy. But I'll just read the entire list.
Yeah.
Are you ready for this, RJ?
Yeah. This is not in order, is it? Or
this is chronological.
So where does the Wash Matt Ryan start? What week of 2021?
That was 2021.
So you went all the way through from 2020. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So yes, since the start of the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts,
these are wins, not losses.
Combined together. These are the quarterbacks, the starting quarterbacks the Eagles have beaten the last 2 seasons. And I'm going to read it as Jimmy has said it here.
Please, that's important. Yeah.
Washed Matt Ryan, Sam Darnold, pre-resurgence Jared Goff, Teddy Bridgewater, Trevor Siemian, Zach Wilson, Garrett Gilbert, Mike Glennon / Jake Fromm, Taylor Heineke, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins in primetime, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence before he became good last season, Kyler Murray, Cooper Rush, Kenny Pickett, Davis Mills, even more washed Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers with a broken thumb, Ryan Tannehill, Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Davis Webb, Daniel Jones again, Brock Purdy / Josh Johnson / Christian McCaffrey.
So which one are you most proud of? Like what's the mantle hanging on in y'all's office?
Even the Trevor Lawrence one that game was like a monsoon, and he was just dropping the football on his own and giving the ball away. So that even then it was a sort of a weird quarterback, a good quarterback win. Kirk Cousins is like a legit quarterback, I guess. Brandon and I always say, like, are you a good team?
Yeah.
And the litmus test is, did you beat Kirk Cousins? Yes, no. Okay. So if you beat him, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was like one of the last people to like abandon Kyler Murray as like a prospect in the NFL. Like I kind of even last year was like, I don't know, man. Even now, like if I'm in the right mood, I can talk myself into it. So I would feel a little bit optimistic about that. I would say from a Cowboys perspective, this is like among the top criticisms that people have is like, hey, and like Brandon, I remember you bringing this up before last season and like on a Jalen Hurts level, like, and not that it's about just, one-on-one, but still, I know we talked about recently Darius Slay and like I forgot the list already, but the like quarterbacks he's picked off as an Eagle, and it's not exactly
like
a
Trevor
murderer's throw.
Siemian,
Right. Well, it's from these games, obviously.
Rush,
so,
right.
But that would, and the fact that, and I think you both acknowledge Dak Prescott is good, really good, whatever. The fact that they can't beat him, that he's not on this list, I think is like, again, where Cowboys fans come from. Like, hey, anytime. Well, I mean, that's my point.
It would be nice to actually see like, Jalen Hurts go up against Dak Prescott.
Well, I know they did week 3 of 2021.
Okay, one time.
Well, basically. I mean, now you want to like if and or butt it away. But anyway, it did happen. So I do think this is a really fair point of criticism, and I would also like kind of push back and say, well, like, okay, they're playing the AFC East this year. Like, Aaron Rodgers is there. His thumb might not be broken, but like he's washed, maybe not washed or even more washed Matt Ryan. Like Josh Allen, I think, has become a little overinflated. That's an island I'm on a little bit by myself, Jimmy. Tua depends on like kind of what mood you're in, like how that's going to go. Mac Jones,
if he's healthy too. Yeah.
Right. Like Mac Jones, like, are we really, like for the most part, 60 to 65% of things are going to remain somewhat chalk. Maybe you do play Dak twice. Maybe Daniel Jones is not quite as bad. Maybe Sam Howell is whatever, but I think that this marries with point number 9 really well. That was what I wanted to get to. So I'm glad that Brandon brought up point number 5, and I'm curious for you to respond to them as a whole, Jimmy, because point number 9 is they face pretty much no adversity in 2022. And I think this like locks into that. Like when were the Eagles ever challenged? And my assessment, and you can tell me if either of you disagree, outside of the Super Bowl, the greatest challenge was the Christmas Eve game against the Cowboys. Like that was a great objective football game, like back and forth, lots of drama, whatever. The Cowboys came out on top. Obviously, Jalen Hurts not a part of it, and the Eagles lost. So, and there aren't a lot of losses to choose from the Eagles last year. Like I would argue that was the highest. Maybe the Colts game where Nick Sirianni bragged for no reason was a point of different kind of adversity. But so your thoughts in general, Jim?
Yeah, that was a big win. The Colts game. They played like garbage in that game for like 3.5 quarters, and then Jalen Hurts willed them down the field and they won. But yeah, the Cowboys game was a fun one to watch. As you mentioned, of course, it was Gardner Minshew. The offense had no problem scoring in that game. There was just I think there was just kind of a defensive meltdown. What was the play to T.Y. Hilton? Where, right, where like, really you let them convert to 3rd and 30. You didn't know they were gonna just bomb it down the field. But anyway, they didn't face really much adversity. They start out 9-0, I think it was, and then their first loss is at home to Washington. Very weird game, not a concerning game in terms of like you lost some players, or actually I guess they did lose a player in that game in Dallas Goedert, but it wasn't a concerning game where they like played horribly and some big thing was exposed in that game. They turn right around. They win a bunch of games thereafter. After that loss, so they didn't let losses pile up. They only lost 2 games at the end of the year, again with Jalen Hurts on the sideline. That their 1 seed came into question. I mean, it looked like they just were going to wrap up the 1 seed after like week 15, week 16. And then turns out they needed to win a game, week 18 just to salt it away. And they did. And then the 2 games in the playoffs were just really easy. They played a team that they already own in the Giants. They couldn't have possibly asked for a better first round opponent in the Giants. Like that's if you could pick one team really that made the playoffs in either conference, you'd say, give me the Giants all day and we'll just wreck that team like we always do. So they did. And then of course, they put it to the 49ers as well. Of course, had the 2 quarterbacks go out in that game. And then, the first real big time test that they had was against the Chiefs. And in the first half of that game, it looked a lot like the Eagles were going to win another Super Bowl. And then second half comes around, they can't stop Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if and how they handle adversity in 2023, because there's no question it's coming. They're not it's like I said, it's probably not as good of a team as it was last year. Not a lot of competition in the NFC, but they have a much harder schedule this year than they had a year ago. And the other thing too, which should be noted, this is a huge point. In that Super Bowl, they had every starter healthy and ready to go for that game, which is, it's just irreplicable. Never going to happen again. So they're probably, and actually the last 2 years, they've had really good injury health. So at some point that's going to regress. And I hate the phrase regress in the mean, but it's, they're going to, let's just be real. They're probably going to have more injuries in 2023 than they had in 2022 and also probably 2021. Now they have something probably good going there. It's not all luck on the injury front. Like they're smart about how they conduct training camp practices and preseason games and all that stuff. So that's not all luck, but there's certainly some luck factored into that. But yeah, as far as the adversity goes, they weren't tested and they're going to be, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle it.
I think the mean is the only direction they can head in. Like you're to your point, like sometimes like when people say that, like it's a player or a person or a team that's like not at one end of the spectrum, but like I told Brandon this and lots of people, like had the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year, like I think they're like a case for like the greatest team of all time. Like like everyone was like it was like the most Madden, like everyone had every record, everyone was a Pro Bowler, all pro, whatever. Like you crushed like you literally faced no adversity because you were like, you could spin that and being like, well, there's no adversity because we just kicked everyone's ass, right? Like we're just that good, whatever.
Yeah.
But to that point, I mean, I guess this is my question. I'd like both of you to answer. How many Eagles do you think had what will ultimately be their career year in 2022?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of them are just awesome players every year.
Sure.
And actually, I think this should, we mentioned earlier, I think I'll touch on this too. You mentioned the age of a lot of their best players are their oldest players too. And which makes sense for a lot of teams because you have to, if you're good, I mean, you have to remain in the league as long as, into your 30s, you have to be good, but they actually have more 32 plus year old starters than any other team in the league. And it's Jason Kelsey, it's Lane Johnson, it's Darius Slay, and it's Fletcher Cox. Fletcher Cox is already very clearly in decline. Darius Slay may be in decline as well. Haven't really seen decline yet from Kelsey. Kelsey thinks he's in decline. He has said that. I haven't seen that from his play. He's just naturally a very self-depreciating person. So but he thinks he's in decline. Lane Johnson certainly is in decline. He's as good as he's ever been. But you have 4 guys. And then if you want to throw Brandon Graham in there too, he's not a starter necessarily, but he's 32 plus years of age. There's only a few teams that even have 3. So that's the 3 starters that are 32 years. One of them is Cowboys. The others are the Saints, 49ers, and Bills. So, at some point they're going to have significant drop off from, those in play from those guys, and to be determined whether that's in 2023 or 2024 and beyond, or to what degree, maybe they drop off a little bit at a time. But yeah, you're playing a dangerous game when you lose, 5 starters on defense, 1 on your offensive line, and then you have 5 guys who are either starters or very key contributors that are now over 32 years of age. So it's and it's weird because long term they actually have succession plans in place for most of these old guys. So you feel okay about them not these guys just not playing well anymore, and then the team sucks. I don't think that's going to happen, but certainly if they fall off specifically in 2023, then I don't know that the young guys won't even play because they won't have a chance because the older guys are still playing ahead of them. But it is a concern in 2023 specifically about potential fall off from those older guys. And I kind of got away from your question there. What was the main point?
Well, the way I would put it, I'll address it. The way I'd put it is that RJ was saying how many guys had their best year last year on the Eagles. And the way I'd put it is very few people underachieved last season. Very few. Quez Watkins underachieved, unequivocally.
Yeah.
Who else? Who really underachieved on the team last year? I think it's almost
Fletcher Cox, maybe you could put in that category.
Yeah, and I would
Slay back half of the season.
Sure, but it's just few and far between.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most underrated concerns going into the season is you can just get a bad year from a good player. And it doesn't mean they're going to be bad even the next season after that, but you take a player, it might be one of the older guys, could be whoever. What if it's just a down year for Devontae Smith? I'm not expecting that for him personally, but I'm saying you could just have a guy who's good but not have their best year. Last year, everyone was having their best years or at least really good years or exceeding expectations. So certainly that's another target of regression, and something you have to worry about is just a good player having a down year. And if you get enough of those, certainly key spots that could hurt a lot. But I guess that's the way I think about it.
But to name a few that really I think exceeded expectations. You could go Hargrave. You could go Josh Sweat. You could go BG, Brandon Graham. You could go James Bradbury certainly had his best year in the NFL.
Jalen Hurts.
Would you say
Miles
Hurts?
Sanders, maybe? Certainly Jalen Hurts. I mean, nobody was expecting him to play the way that he played last year. Nobody.
I bring this
There's a lot of them.
I've mentioned this before to Brandon, and I know he loves it. Now it was a long time ago. I heard Bill Simmons talking about Jason Tatum as a rookie, and he was like, "This is the worst he's ever going to be." And I remember thinking that, I remember understanding the logic behind it, but I remember thinking that's not necessarily true. Yes, to your point a minute ago, you have to be really good to be in the NFL or NBA, whatever, forever. But you could have the greatest year of your life as a rookie. It's totally I thought that might have happened to Micah Parsons a year ago as an example, and it still could happen to Micah Parsons. But that doesn't mean, to Brandon's point,
it happened with Saquon in the division here.
Yeah, but to go back to 2007, after that year, there was so much hype around the Cowboys, right? Because it was and I remember at the time Tony Romo, he did something from some celebrity golf tournament and compared them to the 97 or 96 Broncos that got beat by the Jaguars, and was we just had to kind of whatever. And then they had all this hype in 2008. They had all this talent, and they even traded for Roy Williams, the receiver. And that was such a topsy-turvy, disappointing year that, as you both know, ended with 44-6. You know what I mean? So I didn't realize it at the time that T.O. had a career year in Dallas. You know, that all these things that the greatest, part that we were over the hump. And just because you're over the hump doesn't mean the rest is terrible. But that's why that speaks to the overall regression, I think.
To put a bow on that, I think it's just the NFL is very much, I think, stars align league. You just have to have the stars align.
Yeah.
And that happened for the Giants. So there's Super Bowl titles. And it's just hard for that to happen always. You have to have the right combination of things. And only so much of that is in your control. So much of it is just luck or variance. And that's not really interesting to talk about, I feel as a sports concept. Because, we always want to think athletes and GMs and coaches are controlling things, and it's totally this player did something right, this player did something wrong, but a lot of it is just it's kind of random. It's sports, you never know. But we should probably take a break and move on to the other two teams.
There's the break. We're back. While we were gone, Jimmy, Brandon asked you what your favorite food was, and you told us. And what was it?
What my favorite food is?
Yeah.
Pizza by a mile.
You guys are really boring and chalk.
Shut up.
DGN radio must be such a drag. We both think the Eagles are awesome. We both hate the Cowboys.
Yeah. That's what we say on DGN radio. Yeah.
I mean, so whatever. I do kind of feel like going to the Giants next feels right. I don't know
what topping on this.
They made the playoffs. What normally when I order a pizza, I go half pepperoni. I'm very boring.
Oh wow, only half.
You want the other half just cheese?
Just cheese.
Yeah. You sprinkle in Parmesan and peppers on this, or
well, there's a reason I go only cheese, because I don't think pepperoni pizza reheats as well as just.
That's wild. Pizza. That's wrong. That's crazy. How are you reheating your pizza? How are you reheating it? You got an air fryer?
A toaster oven. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not air fryer.
Toaster, you're putting it vertically in the toaster oven?
No, toaster oven.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I've never had I've never toasted toast horizontally in my life.
You gotta get on the pan method. I'm a big pan reheat guy. You gotta stick the
Okay.
cheese side down first. Just let that for like 20 seconds maybe. Gets a little warm, heat it up, flip it, then cook the rest in a frying pan. It's a great time. It's a good way to do
too much effort.
No,
So
it's
Jimmy,
worth it.
all the dumpster fires are immaculate. And not to say that the Giants one is really about 1 point, because there's obviously a lot of work behind this. I really think that, unlike the others, this is really about 1 point. And it's the first one.
Yeah.
And it's the Giants hitch their wagon to Daniel Jones. I love the emoji selection here. It's the bride emoji.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But the flow chart you have here is important. So the question is, can he win a Super Bowl? Yes, is pay him. No, don't pay him $40 million a year. Yeah. I'm a little bit on the island of like, not quite the Giants did the right thing, but like I understand. Like, what do you do? Like, what was the propose the alternative to me? The rational.
There's no good option for them. Right. I mean, they had three options, because they could either tag him, they could either let him walk, or they could pay him. And he kind of knew that. Like, he had a lot of leverage heading into, especially because he also had Saquon, who was heading into free agency. Right. So the Giants basically wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to keep both guys. So they wanted to sign one and tag the other. And that's what they wound up doing. They got the Jones done deal, and they probably had to pay him a little bit more than anyone would expect him to this player who's really not that good. There's a thinking that he had, his best season as a pro in 2022. And he certainly did. There's also a thinking that he was good, and I don't necessarily know that that's true. He had 5 interceptions in the season, which is an extraordinarily low number, obviously, and a lot lower than what we've become accustomed to what Daniel Jones is as a player, which is a turnover machine, not just in terms of interceptions, but also lost fumbles. So why do you have so few picks? It's because he didn't take any chances down the field. So like, you look at like the NFL Next Gen stats, he was last in the league in terms of quote unquote air yards to the sticks. He was throwing the ball on average like 2.5 or 2.6 yards shy of the sticks. And then I think the other one was average intended air yards, which I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was the lowest in the NFL. They had, I believe it was 28 or 29 pass plays of 20 plus yards last year. Worst in the NFL by a mile. I think the average was in the 40s, somewhere like 49 or something like that. I'd have to look. It's in the article, but they're way below the average. So not just worse than the NFL, but way below the average. Now, to be fair, they had a lot of receivers go down, and the receivers weren't all that good to begin with. When at one point in the season, like, your number one receiver is Isaiah Hodgins, you can certainly understand why they didn't have many pass plays down the field. So what do they do this offseason? They sign Paris Campbell, who can run. They draft Jalen Hyatt, who can run. They re-sign Darius Slayton, who was like the only guy that can make plays down the field for them in 2022. They trade for Darren Waller, who for a tight end is a downfield threat. Why? Because Brian Daboll doesn't want to have this garbage dink and dunk offense. Okay, so great. You have guys that can now make plays down the field theoretically. But what's going to happen when Daniel Jones starts taking more chances down the field? You're probably going to have more interceptions. You're also probably going to have more fumbles, because you're asking your crappy offensive line to pass protect longer for deeper drops and for more time-consuming routes down the field. So, on the one hand, it's really an interesting experiment heading into 2023 with this team, because they already paid him. I equate this to last year with the Eagles. So last year, one of the big gripes with Jalen Hurts was that he couldn't throw, or didn't want to, or was unwilling or whatever to throw in the middle of the field. And also kind of like to the left side of the field. He was just lived on the right side of the field. They go out and they sign trade for AJ Brown. AJ Brown lives in the middle of the field. So if you can't make good use of AJ Brown on your roster, hitting him, getting open over the middle of the field, then you're probably not going to be the quarterback in 2023 and beyond. Turns out Jalen Hurts has a great year, proves he's the guy, gets his big contract, done deal. The Giants kind of have the same thing now. Now they have all these speed guys in their offense. Okay, now show me you can run the offense that we want to run. The problem is they already paid him. So, like, if he's not the guy that they want him to be, if he's not the guy that can run the offense that they want to have, Well, they're locked into him through at least they can get out of it relatively early. It's a 4-year deal for 160. They can get out with a little bit of pain after 2 years. So, but they have hitched their wagon to him for 2 years at a minimum. And if he proves in 2023 that he stinks, well, you're stuck with him on your, whether you draft a guy or whatever, you're still stuck with that guy at a big cap number in 2024. So it's just, do you like Daniel Jones or do you not like Daniel Jones? For me, I don't think he's that bad. Like, I think he's a, middling kind of starting quarterback, whether he's top half of the league or back half of the league. I think he's right around sort of that area. And, it's just not a quarterback that I would want. And the question that you ask is a good one. Like, what else could they have done? And tagging him, that probably would have been the best option. But for them to do that, they would have had to have been willing to let Saquon Barkley walk. And like, they weren't just going to let Daniel Jones walk, because this is a team that hasn't been to the playoffs in a long time. In fact, the 5 years prior to last year, they had the literal worst record in the NFL, tied with the Jets. So they can't sell to their fan base, okay, we made the playoffs, now we're just going to get rid of our starting quarterback who, played to, most people's assumptions well last year.
Career year.
He can't sell that to a fan base. So you're right. They were screwed no matter what they did. And in my opinion, I think, this is from an outsider's view, like a no emotion attached to it whatsoever. No, like, don't care about whatever the repercussions are of the fan base or whatever. For me, their best option is just let Daniel Jones walk, because who cares? You're not going to win the Super Bowl with him anyway. That's the easy thing for me to say. It's also not realistic.
Right.
So that's what they did. Or ultimately, that's not what they did. They signed him to a $40 million a year deal.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of, it's different, not apples for apples, but like my thinking on the Sixers this offseason has been like, there's no good option really for what they have to do moving forward. But so then my goal was kind of like, do the least worst thing. Like, and that to me is like, don't give James Harden a bunch of money and commitment. Like, I know it's not, it's just not realistic to think every offseason you can make these certain moves and that's going to do the thing to get you to a championship. I think sometimes you find yourself in a bad spot where you might just need to tread water, or at least like don't mess things up so bad that maybe next year you can put yourself in the position where you can make those moves to be great. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Daniel Jones is a lost cause. I'm still not like out on him entirely. I think given the situation he was in, the offensive line, the receivers, it was not a perfect one last year, or not even close to perfect. I think he kind of made relatively the most of what he had, but I mean, the receivers still aren't great. And the offensive line, there's some issues there potentially still. Yeah. So I don't really know what to expect more out of him. But more, I guess the biggest points that stand out really to me from your list, Jimmy, 8 and 9. The Cowboys and the Eagles own the Giants, number 8.
Right.
The Giants haven't beaten Dak Prescott in the last 10 tries. Yeah. And the Eagles have as Jimmy pointed out earlier, they've won 25 of the last 31 matchups overall.
Shout out Joe Judge, though. He got one.
He did. He got two. He got two because
he got the last one.
Anyway, in any case, but still, like, just from a standpoint of, I've talked about this before with RJ, the Giants just deserve no benefit of the doubt when it comes to, like, how could you possibly pick them to win the division? Like, they need to earn it. They need to actually, like, beat Dak and beat the Eagles, like, with any kind of consistency before you can be like, oh yeah, that team actually has a chance in this division. They've earned no benefit of the doubt at all. And number 9, and this is something we touched on when we did their record predictions, when they did our game by game look at the schedule. It's a tough start to the year, man.
Yeah, it's rough.
Their first 6 games is home against the Cowboys, who they don't beat. You're playing at the Cardinals. Okay, no Kyler Murray, could be easy, but it's in the desert. It's on the road. Then they go back to back at.
There's no way that's Kyler, by the way. Sorry, he's still hurt. Like, that's what I'm saying.
But you're on the road at the 49ers. Then you play the Seahawks at home, and then you're on the road for 2 more games at Dolphins and at Bills. Like, that's, you're looking at a dicey start there. And a good start isn't everything in the NFL, but it can snowball sometimes.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. You want to get your bad teams later in the year, in my opinion, as I always say, because the good teams might lose a quarterback or something like that, whereas the bad teams, you already know they're going to be bad no matter what up front.
Yeah, so it's just like, it's a little shaky here, and I just don't see enough evidence that I think the Giants are going to make a leap.
I think it's interesting that that Dak Prescott and beating him is a bar that the Giants have to clear, but not one for the Eagles. You know what I mean? Like the fact that the Eagles can't beat him is just like irrelevant. Whatever.
That's so not true. Like
anyway,
Dak has not played well in Eagles games, and
he owns them.
that's true.
He's 7-3.
He played well last year.
Okay. You know what I mean? Like whatever. So
and also the Eagles outgained him, by the way.
You wrote this in the article, Jimmy, but like if you do start like they were 7-3, and to Brandon's point, like he and I were like, and I'm sure you said this too, like we were like they're gonna fall apart. Like this is the beginning of the end. Like after everything kind of started to unravel for them, and they lost to the Cowboys on Thanksgiving predictably, and then to their credit, they kind of stuck their foot in the ground and didn't let things happen. They had to tie with Washington, whatever. Yeah. And that to me, and I think to all of us probably was like a sign of like, hey, maybe you're not like a total disaster anymore. And I think that looking at them now, will they be terrible? No. Will they maybe steal a game from the Eagles or Cowboys this year? Maybe one from each. Maybe, like that potential lives and exists. But I think this is the difference between like a national, like the national narrative on a team is like, oh, you made the playoffs. Like we flipped this 180. Like you've gone from bad team to like really good team now. It's like, this is a slow turnaround. Like, like they are no longer heading due south. Like I think we all agree with that. But I do think I was going to ask you both, who is the most important non-Brian Daboll person for the Giants, or the best not most important, because that would be Daniel Jones, but the best over the next 2 years?
The best player on the team, you mean?
Best person, or like the most important that isn't like positional value person, that isn't Brian Daboll, because we would all agree like he's the top, the best, however you want to qualify. Who's number two?
It's Daniel Jones, but beyond him, I mean, you're drawing up like, is it Saquon? Is it Dexter Lawrence?
Over 2 years though. Like it's probably I was gonna say Kayvon Thibodeau.
Is it Kayvon Thibodeau? Yeah.
Right. But like I can even make the argument against Daniel Jones. And you did.
Sure.
And so my thought behind that was like they're giving, if we're rounding here, $50 million to two players that are maybe not the answer to that question. They're giving them $50 million this year, and neither of them may be the answer to this question. But just that does speak to like, and I think sometimes if you're a rebuilding team, you can have a playoff year that maybe wrecks your rebuild. Like I think it might be good for the Lions as an example, that they haven't had the pressure, the societal pressure, to force them into one hand or another the way the Giants have. Because you're right. Like, how could they have told their fans, like, hey, we made the playoffs for the first time in 1 billion years. We're finally better than the Jets. We're the big brothers once again. Look at us, blah, blah, blah. And then they let both Jones and Barkley walk. That would have been a bad look.
I think this time last year, the thing that they could really hang their hat on in terms of building blocks are those offensive tackles. So Andrew Thomas, rough rookie year, much better his second year. And he was great last year, like a legit, like all pro type player. One of the 5 best left tackles in the league, probably. They draft Evan Neal, 7th overall. Evan Neal freaking stunk last year. And it was the one game against the Giants against the Cowboys rather, where I forget who was calling that game. It might've been a primetime game. Like it might've been Collinsworth, where they just were harping on how Evan Neal is getting slaughtered by who was ever on his side. Must have been DeMarcus Lawrence or Michael Parsons, or probably a combination of those two guys. They're just killing him. Brandon Graham absolutely wrecked that guy in both games, in a bunch of games last year. So, and Hassan Reddick for that matter too. So Evan Neal owes Andrew Thomas like everything, because Giants fans and media and whatever were very slow to criticize Evan Neal the way that they did Andrew Thomas a few years ago, because Andrew Thomas ultimately proved them wrong. So now they weren't like all in on like criticizing Evan Neal because, Andrew Thomas stunk his first year, but he became one of the best tackles in the league. So their assumption, I feel like, my vibe anyway, is that they feel like Evan Neal is going to have the same career path as Andrew Thomas because they just saw it firsthand. I don't see it that way. Evan Neal was horrible last year, and that is a glaring, gaping hole. And again, this time last year, that was probably, that they got their bookends for the foreseeable future. I don't know that they can really feel that they have that now after the horrible rookie season that Neal had.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, or I have hope that he can get better, just because I still like the pedigree, athleticism, size, Alabama. That I'm not ready to say he's a bust yet. I'm probably more optimistic, but I could be dead wrong. So to me, it's Joe Shane, because I just think this Giants team still needs the pieces. They don't have. It's not like they have the horses and now it's about like making it work. I still do not have the horses. So I think he has to navigate that. And obviously any GM needs to draft well, but especially this one,
Sure.
after committing to this quarterback, like he has to find a way to stack this roster and like close the talent gap between the Eagles and Cowboys that was clearly there. And the best. That's a big reason why no one believed in the Giants last year, because it's like, okay, they have this record, but the talent, you just look at the roster, the talent's not there. So I still think he needs to close the talent gap. I think Dable has done enough to where you believe that he can kind of make the most-ish, at least, of what he has. But if you don't have the horses at the end of the day, then it's just not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dable is like a great chopped chef, but like, you need some legitimate ingredients at a certain point. It's like, dude, we can only have you make like something delicious out of like eggs and frosted flakes. Like, something like that. You know what I mean?
What a combo.
Okay. Last one, Jimmy. 10 reasons the Commanders will be a dumpster fire this season. Brandon once famously said that he would prefer the combination of Ron Rivera and Alex Smith to Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott.
No, I did not.
That may be the worst thing that I have ever heard Brandon say.
That's not true. I did not say that.
What was the quarterback? If it wasn't Alex Smith, it might have been Taylor Heineke.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, baby.
Oh, sorry, it was Ryan. That was who it was.
And we never got to see him healthy, and it was therefore a nullified bet.
That doesn't make the take any better. The head coach,
he got hurt.
The head coach is a lame duck, is your first point. I have to imagine there's like 500 words just on Ron Rivera. I mean, I'm so happy that you agree with me. I feel like he's a nice guy. He's a great person. You know what I mean? He's a great individual, human story.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Big fan of Ron Rivera, the person, but like he stinks as an NFL head coach. I don't know where all this credit comes from.
It's just mind blowing that I forget who they lost to. It was a crucial game at the end of the season last year. It was week 17. So they still had another game left, but they lost. And then in the post-game press conference, he got asked something to the effect of like, well, what if you're eliminated later today? And he was like, he cocked his head and he looked at the reporter and he was like, kind of like, what are you talking about? And he was like, well, you're eliminated from the playoffs if the Packers win later today. And he was like, oh, okay. He didn't know. He did not know that he could be eliminated, which is just freaking like mind-blowing to me. How, as the head coach, do you not know what the elimination like scenarios are when, first of all, every fan that club that follows the Commanders closely sure as hell knew what the elimination scenarios were. But at some point, isn't there some analytics nerd that just finds you during the week and says, oh, hey, Ron, by the way, if this happens and this happens, we're eliminated. And if this happens, then we're good and blah, 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 blah. You kind of have to know that stuff because at the end of the game, if it's like maybe going to go to overtime or you're in overtime and you have to know like what the sort of scenarios are if you win, tie, lose, whatever, that's all important stuff in terms of like strategic, the way that you're calling the game strategically at that point. It's just crazy that he didn't know. It's just nuts. But then also the track record that he's had since he's been with the Commanders, like they asked him to come in and sort of help fix the culture, which, I mean, talk about like monumental tasks. You can't hold that against them when you have this owner who's just running around, creating a new scandal seemingly every week. But record-wise, they're 22, 27-1. And if the owner wasn't selling the team this offseason, he'd have been fired. I mean, like, there's no way he'd have gotten a fourth season, but they didn't fire him because Daniel Snyder didn't want to pay out the rest of his contract when he's selling the team anyway. So basically he just remains with the team out of sheer luck that the team is getting sold. And actually, it's not even sold yet. So I think there's this perception that the team gets sold and then boom, changes happen immediately and everything's hunky-dory. No, it's going to take a certain, I don't know what the timeline is, but there's going to be a certain amount of time where the team still looks a whole lot like and operates a whole lot like it did under the previous regime.
That happened with the Sixers and Josh Harris, who bought the Commanders. Same thing. Like he kept things status quo for a little bit too, because it's kind of like, all right, let's figure out what we have here, and then we're going to make some adjustments down the road. Yeah. So it's not like a night and day kind of fix. But I think the book on the Commanders, as we said all offseason, has just been they're in a holding pattern. And there really isn't much they could have done this offseason realistically. Like I was saying to RJ before, like, they weren't going to like take a big swing on a trading up for a quarterback. Like, that's not like where they are. They can't do that. Like, what's the point of that? Like the old ownership's going to do that. Like, I just don't think that was ever really realistic. So Not a lot of needle moving stuff for them this offseason. It's kind of just like, I don't know, what's the word? Not pay as you go, like color in the lines. It's like very just like straightforward cookie cutter kind of just, all right, we're going to draft a cornerback in the first. I think it's very just kind of straightforward, nothing too exciting or interesting. I guess the one thing that I like to push back on, and something you raised here, you had it second to last because you said you couldn't completely endorse it as a reason why the Commanders will be bad in 2023. But I don't think people like nationally critically think enough to question why Eric Bieniemy chose to join the Washington Commanders in this weird liminal state they're in, like over every other team. It's very hard for me to believe that this organization is like the one that got over on everyone, and they were the smart ones, and they hired Eric Bieniemy, and they're great, and everyone else is dumb for not hiring him as their head coach. Like, that's really hard for me to buy. Maybe it ends up being true because the NFL does get things wrong. I'm not saying it's impossible that that is the case, but just like the idea that like, wow, they got Bieniemy, and you know, Sam Howell's going to be something. It's just all it's just a wasted year. That's the reality for this Commanders team. It's a waste of a year. You're just kind of hoping to get through it and get to 2024.
So you had a point in your Giants article, Jimmy, about how the Cowboys and the Eagles own them. I don't consider the last two Washington division titles to be real. So
7-9, yeah,
right. So 2020 is obvious. Like they were 7-9, and through my lens, Dak Prescott was hurt, right? So it's like, okay, like that's why you won the division, like in my mind. But like the 2020 Eagles were a disaster, and like even then, the final win was like thrown to them by Doug Peterson, right? But so their previous division title,
and they still almost didn't win that game, by the way,
right? So like, but their previous division title in 2015 was the final season of Tony Romo, which we didn't know at the time. But so he gets hurt, so like he's done for the year, and that was the Eagles. Correct me if I'm wrong. Final Chip Kelly season that was like the total, also like dumpster fire poetically. So like they've only ever won the division when like literally everybody else was by like default, the worst, like the worst possible versions of themselves outside of the rookie RG3 year. Which even then, what were they, like 2-7, and they like clawed back. So like it always takes this like comedy of errors from their division rivals for things to go their way. So like, I mean, if we talk about like benefit of the doubt, like, or anything, like, I'm just not willing to give it to anybody. And it's a little bit harsh, but I'm not willing to give it to anybody, like even on their team. I think you talked about Chase Young. We were all kind of willing to be like, okay, well, they got this like generational pass rusher. Like, but how much are we really worried about that? But like, even that kind of looks a little bit suspect, obviously. They didn't pick up the 5th-year option, et cetera, et cetera. I think sometimes we overlook and sometimes overblow certain things. Like y'all make a big deal of the Mike McCarthy run the ball comment, whatever. But other things don't get enough tread in my mind. And that's your point number 5, how they always have a lot of injuries. You reference the NFL player team report cards and how they are like last in everything like that. I mean, does it matter as much as like being aggressive on 4th down? No, but like this matters in a non-zero way. Like who enjoys going to work for the Washington Commanders in any capacity? You know what I mean? Like, like what is the reason that anybody likes working for them?
Yeah. And start with Chase Young. Like he got heat his rookie year because he missed OTAs. And then last year,
they're like, oh, he's just going to be on PUP. Like he's going to be back. Don't worry.
His rookie year, the year after he got injured, he also missed OTAs, which people excused because he was recovering from his ACL tear. And then this year, they, like you mentioned, they don't pick up his 5th-year option, and he's got everything in the world to play for this year. Like to wherever he winds up in 2024 and beyond, he's got everything to play for in 2023. What does he do? He misses OTAs again, which like it was like him and 2 other guys. Like missing OTAs, not a big deal if you're like a respected veteran, been around the league for a long time, have actually a resume to point to. I've done this, and this. You want to miss OTAs? By all means, go right ahead. But for this guy to miss OTAs, it's crazy that he thinks that he's above his teammates to just skip out on OTAs when he's got so much riding on a season. But yeah, he's turned out to be a big disappointment. Actually, this was a point that I had in there that I wondered how it would be received by like Commanders fans and whatever. And they actually thought I undersold it. So like, they're like, yeah, he's a bust. Like he's not becoming a bust. We view him as a bust right now. So yeah, I think that's all. For me, I just look at this team, and I mentioned earlier that, you know, for the 7th straight year, they're going to have a new week 1 starting quarterback. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about Sam Howell or Jacoby Brissett. It just looks like another year like any other. Like Sam Howell kind of reminds me of like, remember the year they started or they were going. I don't remember if he actually wound up starting week 1 or not, but like John Beck. Like
yeah,
their fans sold themselves on John freaking Beck.
John Beck.
And then Jacoby Brissett, like him a lot. Like he actually played
great person,
well
great, yeah, like kind of like Ron Rivera, right? Totally with you.
You know, kind of like borderline starter, certainly a great backup.
Mm-hmm.
He's like Ryan Fitzpatrick to me. You know what I mean? Like you're not winning the give. If he's your starter, you can feel good about watching him and whatever. And you know, he's gonna win some games, but you have a 0% chance of winning the Super Bowl if he's your starter heading into the season. So it's that, I mean, that's where it kind of just begins and ends for me with the Commanders, and they're scheduled to be, 4th in the NFL, in the NFC East in terms of like Super Bowl odds or whatever. And rightfully so. It's funny because the NFC East hasn't had, or you mentioned like their divisional wins in the past. And of course there hasn't been a repeat NFC East champion in almost 20 years, back when the Eagles did it in 2004, 2005. The Commanders have won 3 times during that span. And then I actually looked to see how many times the team that won the division was favored to win the division the next year. And I couldn't find that necessarily, but I could find Super Bowl odds for the next year. And I'd say about like, it was a little bit more than half the times the team that won the division the prior year had the best Super Bowl odds the next year. And all 3 times that the Commanders won the division, never. Like they either didn't have the best Super Bowl odds of the other teams in the NFC East, or it was like pretty widely, like they weren't even close to the team. So like every time they win the division, it's just like, yeah, please, that's not happening again. So like, yeah, they are kind of like for as bad as the Giants have been, like I mentioned earlier, the 5 years prior to last year, they had the literal worst record in the NFL. This is still very clearly the worst franchise in the division by a country mile.
That's the right note to end on. Jimmy, thank you for walking us through all 4 dumpster fires. It was a dumpster diving episode, so to speak. One last thing before we get, I'm sure no one's ever made that like connection, having you on to talk about the dumpster series. So I'm proud to be the first. But last thing, every episode, as of like a month ago, we each add a song to an NFC East mixtape playlist.
Okay.
So you're our first guest who gets to add one. So what song would you like to add to the NFC East mixtape playlist?
I actually made a little trip to ShopRite this morning, and in the car, Scenario by Tribe Called Quest was on.
Okay.
And I was
Very
I
nice.
don't think that's a song that I don't think there's too many people that don't know most of the lyrics to that song.
That's an excellent choice.
Jimmy's not the biggest music guy, so I really appreciate him taking the time to. I preface this to him. I know he's like, no, you're not the biggest music guy, but I need a song. So thank you, Jimmy.
You got it, buddy.
Are you gonna send him out, RJ? What are you doing?
My internet was buffering for a second. So I was actually like silently hoping that y'all were still talking, because if not, it was going to create the awkward situation.
Well, Jimmy, obviously, thanks for coming on. You can everyone can check out Jimmy's work and these obviously read through these full articles, the Dumpster Fire series on phillyvoice.com. You can also check out Jimmy Kempski on Twitter at Jimmy Kempski, and then obviously listen to him on BGN Radio as well, the Bleeding Green Nation podcast feed.
Appreciate it, guys. Don't lose any fingers.
Nice.
BLG, a fantastic dumpster series. What was your favorite discussion? What team?
I mean, it's hard to say. They're just all so good to talk about.
I've been reading the dumpster series for a long time, and it never misses. Like it's an annual like pickup. You know what I mean?
It's a great time. He does it at a very good time of year because nothing else is going on. So it's kind of just like dominates the cycle for that week. And yeah, Jimmy does a good job with them. And I think it's nice. We did the Bears episode and the Bullish episode. So we kind of examined some of this stuff, but I think it's still good to revisit it with Jimmy, who puts a lot of time into this.
That's what I was going to say. If somebody hasn't read them, we just kind of like 30,000 foot flew over them. These are all supported by lots of facts. Like each one of these points, it isn't just like him, aimlessly or mindlessly hating on a team. Like he can argue each and every point, if that isn't obvious. So,
well, it's also like dumpster fire. Because like we were saying like bearish in terms of like things that could go wrong. Like he's saying like why they could actually be like a really bad team, like a disaster that season.
That is so funny. I mean, it lines up with what we said about how Washington's last 2 division titles were so like fluky. It's so funny that like nobody ever believes in them the year after they win it. You know what I mean? Like that's a really all that, if you think about it, really led to the mixtape, because this is just the Cowboys and Eagles division. It's a really funny situation. I also think like, man, like it is the dumbest thing that the Giants are the team with the most Super Bowls this century of any in the division. Like that's
the NFL. Like it's just, it doesn't make sense. The stars align thing. Yeah, it's chaotic. That's why we love it. It's random. It's fun.
I think I loved that point, and we had so much to get to with Jimmy. I wanted to squeeze this in. You mentioned the stars aligned. He mentioned that the Eagles had the best roster in the NFL last year. I agree with both those points. And this all appropriately for this episode reminds me of something Mike McCarthy once said that I don't know that you've ever heard, but I liked it a lot. And he said, defense wins championships, but the Super Bowl is won by the quarterback. I loved that line. And I think the Super Bowl we just saw is an example of that, right? Like Jalen Hurts might be the second best quarterback in the NFL, but like the fact that he wasn't the first was just like a tiny little flaw. He
was the best quarterback in that game.
But like the quarterback, I mean, he also had the fumble, like, you know what I mean? But like that's like okay, it's such a that's what I'm saying. Like it's such a finicky.
Even with that, he was still the better quarterback in that.
That's
game,
what I'm saying. Like it's such a finicky game that like a one moment positively or negatively can swing things in like a legacy altering way. It's just an amazing game that I don't know why we allow it to become such a big part of our personalities, but here we are.
Here we are. It's time for us to pick our songs for the playlist.
So, well, a quick scheduling update. So we're recording this episode on Monday, July 3rd, and this episode's going to publish. You're all listening to it on Wednesday, July 5th. We are going to record next week's episode this Friday, right? That I believe so, or yeah, that's the plan.
Yes.
So we're going to record this on Friday, the 7th.
Episode that gets published on July 12th.
Right. So we're going to this is the first of 2 episodes that you and I are recording this week. But we're making sure, because I'm going to be traveling next week, that everyone's going to have something in their feed next week. Because last time we didn't do that, we got in a lot of trouble.
Right.
So
take a week off. It's a break.
Right. So Jimmy gave us his song. Thank you to Jimmy Kempski for that. Rachel has submitted both of her songs for the week, but I'm not going to tell
the one.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell her about the second one. I'm just saying I want everyone to know that Rachel is diligent. So Rachel's first song is Countdown by Beyonce, an excellent choice. I don't know that it cracks my top 5 favorite Beyonce songs, but I think that speaks to her catalog as a whole.
My friend Jess really loves Renaissance. Obviously, how could he not? Great album. And is going to see Beyonce in concert in Philly here coming up. So really, I'm not going, but she's going, and I'm really excited to hear how that goes. She might be the biggest Beyonce fan in the world. So great pick by Jess. Should ask Rachel if she's going to any of the Beyonce tour.
Where's the concert? At the link?
Yeah, I believe. Or no, I think it might be at maybe, I guess so. That or the Sixers venue, the Wells Fargo. I don't know. One of those two. It's definitely a stadium venue, of course.
Right. It's not the park, right? For sure.
Okay.
You want to go first? Okay, you go first.
Speaking of, no, not speaking of anything, but I did the Hot Ones challenge. I meant to bring that up earlier. All the 10 sauces with the wings. My friends were visiting in town. Did that last night.
I have a quick question. Like,
yeah,
because I actually recently discovered Hot Ones, the show.
Oh wow!
So
where have you been?
I know. I don't know. I mean, like I get locked.
This is like up your alley too. Like you like. That
I know.
Kind of stuff.
So I've watched like 1,000 episodes like in the last like 2 weeks, but like sometimes I get tunnel vision on stuff, and like it's hard to crack into that. But anyway, so my question is like, A, is this a popular thing like that people do like in their own lives? And
I don't know.
So like, how did you have to buy all the sauces, and did you dress like one wing with each sauce? Is like, what was the you can
buy the kit, like, and they send you all the flavors from the current season.
That's
shout out to my friend Ivy who did that. And then we got like 20 wings plain from somewhere, and then no free ads. And then she individually prepared each one in a little like jar that I had that has a lid on it, so you could like shake it up, like put the sauce in, shake it up, wash it out each time. And I gotta say, the bomb really is that bad. Like it's like literally the second it tasted my tongue, it's just like not a good flavor. Like the flavor is like it's like just bad. It's
you and Jennifer Lawrence, you understand the same pain.
Right? It's honestly like that one and the last one were like just pain. Like they hurt. The last one I thought had a better flavor than the bomb, but a lot of pain. The first, it starts out nice, and like you're like, oh, this isn't so hard, and then it just really ramps up, and then you gotta have. So we both had milk and ice cream on handy, and I think both of those things were vital. They don't like make it magically go away, but they definitely take the edge off. So I would recommend those if you're gonna do it.
Okay. Well, so you were somewhat inspired by the Hot Ones challenge for your song choice?
Not really, but I just wanted to bring that up. So I thought it was topical.
No free ads, but Hot Ones, the pack, right?
Well, I mean, that's like fun. And it's not an ad. It's just, a fun thing to do. I'm gonna pick. It's called Cochise. That's spelled Cochise by Audioslave. I've been listening to some Audioslave recently. I feel like another good summer kind of band. For those who don't know, Audioslave has 3 of the 4 members from Rage Against the Machine and the late great Chris Cornell. Rest in peace. And yeah, that's the first song on that album, their first album. And I think that's a really cool album to listen to from front to back. So check it out if you're looking for a good song and a good album.
That is a good choice. This is a more eclectic week, and I say that in a good way. Like, I like that. Like, I don't like when we have, like, we've done this, what now, 4 or 5 weeks. Like, I don't like when it's like the same kind of vibe, same kind of song, like over and over again. That's not fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is probably the heaviest song on the playlist, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what it's going to take. We got to build out some, fancy schmancy, music, and some also hardcore crazy, and some like upbeat, some slow. We want this to be a mixtape. That's the whole point.
That's right, baby.
So my song, this might be like a have you ever heard of Hot Ones thing? Like, I don't know anyone who's heard of this except for my friend Steven. He was the person who introduced me to this. Not Steven, our mutual friend. So my friend Steven introduced me to this band like 10 years ago. And the only other person I've ever seen reference them was, do you know who Grant Gustin is? He played The Flash on the TV show. This band that I'm about to tell you performed at like a VMAs or CMAs. It wasn't CMAs, but like they performed at something. And he tweeted, I remember that like that night, he was like, "Oh my gosh, they're performing. This is so cool." So I always associate this band with Grant Gustin. And it is Vintage Trouble. You're aware of who Vintage Trouble is?
Never heard of them.
Okay, so we're all a little bit off except for Rachel with Beyonce. I mean, so Rachel with like a super renowned person, obviously. The song is called "Still and Always Will." Some great guitar, like bluesy sort of riffing, and I think people will enjoy it. It's a great song to like have on in the background of like a cookout or something like that. Well, by now everyone has celebrated the 4th of July, but for you have the gift of being able to listen to it on your 4th of July. So.
Still a long summer. I'm sure people can use it later on.
Now you spelled out the song. You don't have to spell it out if you subscribe to the playlist on Apple Music. We put the link to that. We also need to start including the Spotify list as well. We have a loyal listener who has done that, curated the songs on Spotify.
What's their name?
I'm looking it up, so if you can buy me some time. I'm blanking right now.
I know you didn't know it, so I wanted.
I'm trying to find the tweet right now.
Yeah, but we appreciate that. Yeah, it's been fun adding to this. Do we put Kiss song in there? I don't remember if we okay.
I guess he wasn't that one. I guess Jimmy wasn't the first, but
well, I mean, he was the first guest. Kiss was not a guest. He's just our producer. He was a guest producer that week, which we appreciate, but he wasn't like on. I mean, he talked for a little bit, but not to us, so it's a little different. And also is still like, he's Vox affiliated. Jimmy was our first non-company person to contribute to the playlist, and I'm surprised that he was able to do it. Because again, we've talked about music before on BGN Radio, and I was like, "Can you tell me like an artist or a band you like?" And he could not name one. So,
talking about Jimmy, not Kiss.
Yeah, Jimmy. So I was worried that he might struggle, but he had a good one. He picked one that he heard, and I think that's fun. Sometimes you go somewhere, you hear something in the store, get a song stuck in your head. It's a good time.
It is DC from GB is the display name. Has I don't know the character's name, but a Dragon Ball Z character as their profile picture on Twitter. It was difficult to find because of Twitter these days. Twitter handle is at DC_709. DC from GB has their baseball, basketball, NFL, and NHL teams listed in their Twitter bio. Do you want to hear this? Because you're somebody who hates like, oh, if you're from Philly, you have to root for other Philly teams. Whatever. It says MLB, Blue Jays, NBA, Raptors, NFL, Eagles. So, kind of all geographically related.
I mean, so it sounds like he's from Toronto.
NHL, Bruins.
That's interesting. I would,
right?
Yeah, I don't know. The first two, okay, yeah, Raptors, Blue Jays, you're in Toronto.
Yeah, like maybe it's like
the Maple Leafs are like historically like very depressing and like embarrassing. Like the NFL's version of the NHL's version of the would you say so?
Well, there's the drought, you know what I mean? Like there's whatever.
But I mean, I think the Cowboys have like won, like division titles and stuff. I don't even know if the Maple Leafs have done that really so much, but I don't know. Not the biggest hockey guy. But let's wrap this up.
Okay. Thank you to the world. Thank you to
The world.
the world. As we go, Brandon, can you tell me something you will, and everyone else something you did eat on the 4th of July?
Oh man. I think we're gonna have a barbecue, so I'm gonna guess some burgers and dogs. Keep it simple. That's all you need.
What goes on your dog?
Nothing.